right. Welcome, everybody. I'll start us off. My name is Gabrielle, and I am the Outreach Coordinator for Lutherans Restoring Creation. We are so glad you could be here for tonight's connection call. But before we begin, we want to begin with a land acknowledgement, or a moment to honor our Indigenous land keepers. Lutherans Restoring Creation, we have our own land acknowledgement that maybe Phoebe will drop into the chat. To reflect the great number of places that we as a network, as a call, are calling in from and living in and working in. But we want to start a habit of asking people to share land acknowledgements more specific to where they live. And tonight I'll share one from where I'm calling from in what we now call Western Washington. So I invite you to share your name, where you're calling from, and the names of the original Indigenous Earth Keepers in the chat. I gratefully honor and acknowledge that I live, work, and speak tonight on the traditional lands of the Puyallup people. The Puyallup people have lived on this land since time immemorial, and they are still here today. They live, work, raise their children, take care of their community, practice their traditional ways, and speak the Twilshutsi language, just as their ancestors did. I commit to solidarity beyond just these words, including uplifting their voices and continuous learning about their history and lived experience today. Thank you. I see some people are already putting that in the chat. Well, I'll keep talking while we keep introducing ourselves in the chat. I appreciate it. Tonight, we are going to be taking a look at our Kairos Moment, which is a study guide released by the ELCA to help us take a deeper look at what our church teaches about climate change through our recent social message. As someone who has personally been in a study guide or a study group for this guide, I'm really excited to share this with you, and we are honored that the author of this guide, Ryan Cumming, is here. Recently, Lutherans Restoring Creation has looked at a survey of the ELCA, and we've discovered that I think around 80% of this denomination is concerned about climate change, but only about 9% of us have the opportunity to talk about climate change in church or choose to talk about climate change in church. And that is a pretty large gap, but I think that's part of why this resource that we're going to look at tonight is so important, getting that conversation started. So tonight, a quick agenda. We'll hear from Ryan about this guide, but we will also hear from people who have already used this guide, and then we'll do some question and answer. So I encourage you to use the chat to ask questions for later in the session. It would be great if you could put a Q in front of your question so that we can reference it later and find it easily. But without further ado, I will pass the mic to Phoebe to introduce our speaker tonight.
I'm just really grateful to be able to introduce Ryan because I've had the opportunity to work with Ryan in many different roles. I have to admit, Ryan, I don't think I have the lineage of all your different titles. So I'll say the title that you're coming to us with tonight, which is, and I have to have it up here, Program Director, Theological Ethics, Education, and Community Engagement, which are all good words, and I appreciate them. And I have to say that what I know about Ryan, and I'm so grateful that he's part of the institution that helps usher all of our churches in certain theological conversations, is that you are like the epitome of a continuous learner, and you're always wanting all of us in any room that I've seen you in, Zoom rooms, a bunch of squares. You're always asking the question of who aren't we thinking of? And what about this angle? And I really appreciate that. And I think when you are part of making a study guide, I thought of this as I was, testing my kids on their finals, and they have these study guides, and there isn't a test for this study guide, right? Like when we say study guide, we really don't feel like there are any right answers necessarily, but the idea is to start a conversation. And Ryan, you're really good. And I'm so glad that you do have this long title. Now that I know more about what you do, while you've always done great work with World Hunger and your long lineage of other professorial titles and roles, the fact that you help our church at large think about how to talk to each other, I just think is wonderful. And we're really lucky to have you. So thank you, Ryan. Over to you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Phoebe. I appreciate that. And much mutual respect and gratitude for the opportunity that we've had to work together over the years, over the actually many years that we've worked together now. But thank you very much for that. You may have set me up for, tough expectations to follow. It's great to be here with you all. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share about this study guide. I won't reiterate the title that Phoebe already mentioned. As I told them earlier before the call really got started, I've learned in the ELCA that the importance of our position is like indirectly related to their title. The shorter your title, the more important you are. That's how I've learned. So Program Director for Theological Ethics, Education, and Community Engagement. You see where I rank. So part of my work in the ELCA is to co-lead the development of the ELCA's social teachings, our social statements, social messages, and such. And then a core part of my work is developing wraparound educational resources, which this study guide is the first that I've done in this role. So really excited to share it with you. When I was doing my Master's of Education, one of the things that one of our professors told us that kind of stuck with me was they said, all learning has one goal: to change performance, to change behavior. And that stuck with me in part because it was really hard to wrap my head around it. But it became, as you'll see momentarily, sort of the backbone of what this study guide is. So I'll share it with you in just a moment here. Let me get this set up. I have 25 windows open, so it may take me a moment to find it. There we are. All right. So as we're sharing this, so this study guide is based on the ELCA social message, Earth's Climate Crisis, which was adopted by the ELCA in 2023. And I'll go over a little bit about what that means in a moment. Before digging into the study guide, though, I want to share a video with you.
We're learning more about that alarming video of a UPS guy in distress from the extreme heat. He struggles.
You hear if that's a little bit quiet, I imagine, right? No, is it playing right? Okay.
To make it onto the front porch. Then he collapses, overwhelmed by the 110-degree temperature in Arizona. He has to lie down for a moment to recover. Slowly, he gets back up again and reaches for the doorbell before stumbling back to his truck.
It's just a sickening feeling that you don't know what's going to happen to that guy if he goes to the next house or to his truck.
Homeowner Brian Enriquez says he was shaken when he saw what his Ring camera had captured.
You can see in the video, he's looking at his hands, shaking his hands. I mean, he could have a mini stroke or anything.
You may be surprised to hear that UPS trucks have no air conditioning.
It feels so freaking hot back here.
Drivers are taking to social media to share their extreme working conditions. This guy is drenched in sweat.
To get air through the truck, the best way is we always leave the doors open.
We rented a UPS truck to experience what drivers endure.
UPS drivers call these trucks the box, and there's a reason. They literally bake in the sun. This one's been parked for a while. Outside, we're registering 95 degrees, but inside, we're approaching 120.
UPS says the driver on that Arizona video is fine today, adding, "Our package delivery vehicles make frequent stops, making air conditioning ineffective." Across the nation, the heat is on.
We're talking about all-time records, like we have never in recorded history in centuries seen this type of heat.
Check out the forecast in Houston.
We've got triple digits in the forecast.
Look at all those hundreds.
It's going to feel like you're standing inside of a hairdryer.
The extreme weather sparks.
So just a short clip. What did you see? What did you hear? And you can feel free to unmute and say it if you like, or you can share it in the chat. What did you see and what did you hear? And maybe Gabrielle, I can't see the chat, so if you can share if people are posting there.
I'll just speak up. I heard the ridiculous claim from UPS that because they make frequent stops, air conditioning would be ineffective, which is totally false.
Yeah, Quentin shares, we don't have Arizona weather here in Pennsylvania, but my dad's a UPS driver. Thanks for sharing, Quentin. The trucks get super hot and are also cold in winter. and there are no accommodations made. Phyllis shares awful working conditions. We saw someone nearly dying, people suffering.
I'd like to know is where is the direct communication with their manager or with their company?
And along with that, where's the oversight? How would they know if someone passes out, loses consciousness? What other workers do you think might be impacted by this, or in similar ways?
Have the workers been educated about the effects of heat stroke, heat illness?
It's a great question.
In the chat, we see other workers affected include construction workers, Department of Public Works, summer camp staff. I'm sure we all have some connection with the Lutheran Outdoor Ministry and know somebody there. Farm workers, says Luke, roofers, construction workers, road crews, outdoor workers, post office delivery. Lots shared in the chat.
I watched the tree service over here in 112-degree weather at my house, down below me, clear cutting property, no water, nothing. And that's why I wonder too, where in this UPS truck do they provide them with something cool to drink?
Exactly. Yeah. Showing care for them. And you know, maybe just think in your head, we won't ask like a poll question, but have you ever considered during, you know, especially, you know, we're facing a heat wave in some areas of the US right now. Have you ever considered workers like UPS drivers or Amazon drivers or postal service employees who are working in these conditions? I can tell you, having been a truck driver, managing the heat when you're in a truck is no small affair. And I never had to deal with the temperatures that are being reported in the news story there.
How about the people that walk?
Oh yeah, people who walk, people who have to be outside for, you know, any length of time. One of the things that we've heard with outdoor workers in the southwest of the US is that they may have to start changing their work hours to start working earlier in the day so that they're not out in the hours between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. when the sun is at its peak.
They're adding now same thing to schools. Schools in Georgia start earlier and end earlier.
Yeah, exactly. You have to make these kind of adaptations. One of the concerns about those kinds of adaptations is that they're not legally required. And we know that in some places they've actually been relaxed. And so one of the important topics when we're considering climate change and knowing that temperatures are going to continue to rise in a lot of places and that heat waves are going to become more intense and longer lasting is what are the heat safety standards that are in place to protect workers. This website, this is from the Natural Resource Defense Council, tracks occupational heat safety standards in the US. One of the things to look for, if you visit that tiny URL, which I invite you to do on your own, is does your state have an existing heat standard and how many workers are at risk? When you visit that site, you'll find that you can click on any state when you can select state or federal. We'll select state here, and then we'll select my old home state of Illinois just to see if they have a standard. You can also select if they have an existing or a pending standard at the top. But you see with Illinois, they have no existing heat standard, which leaves just over 2 million workers at risk or working in high-risk industries. Now, if we hover over the blue states, which are the states that have existing heat standards, we can see if those heat standards are permanent or temporary and who's covered, outdoor workers, indoor workers, or particular industries that might be covered. And what do you see when you look at the map? There's very few that have existing heat standards. Most do not. And some of the places that we know get the hottest or the most humid along the southern US there are lacking those heat safety standards. Raising concern for workers and for other people who are impacted by climate change is part and parcel of what this study guide is really about. There's 3 things I'd like us to be able to do by the end of our time together. So first, I'm going to describe some of the topics that are covered in the study guide. I'm also going to show how the sections of each session kind of flow together. I think one of the things that we get when we have a study guide is we have lots of activities and we aren't really sure how they're supposed to actually fit or why they might be important. And I'm also hoping that we can identify some ways to use the study guide in our own context, especially with the feedback that we'll hear from Christine and Phoebe later on. So before getting into the study guides itself, the first question that I asked in developing the study guide was, what works well in teaching about climate? And maybe some of you have encountered this before. One of the first things that works well is stories. Rather than jumping right into the science, listening to people's stories, finding that personal relevance, but then also finding local relevance. We know that people don't want to hear just about how climate change is impacting places far away, but how will it impact me? How will it impact my community? Another is easy to digest information. Climate science is really difficult to digest for people who are new to it. So how do we make that easy to digest? And of course, as people of faith, we want connections to the Bible and to our faith. Each of these informed the development of our Kairos moment. The ultimate goal is, as I mentioned early on, the goal of the study guide is to empower people to act. We're beyond the point, as the Earth's climate crisis social message states, we're beyond the point of merely understanding that climate change is happening. We have to encounter the moment now as a moment where we choose to act. So how do we empower people to act? It's guided by the values of hope, action, and agency. We can act. There's a hopeful outlook with action. There's effective action that we can take. So those are the values. And then there are 4 sessions to the study guide: finding our place in creation, climate change as a public health crisis, the future of farming, and active hope and agents of change is the 4th. The idea is that in general, groups can do this as a weekly study over a month, or perhaps over 2 months, or even over a shorter period of time. The social message that lies behind the study guide, it's kind of important to understand what a social message is. So I'll just spend a moment on this very briefly. A social message is part of the ELCA's body of social teachings, which includes social statements, social messages, and social policy resolutions. A message is a timely response to a specific issue. That might be a particular facet of war or violence or peace, like a social message on terrorism, or in this case, a social message on the climate crisis right now. It's built on existing social teachings. So rather than developing new teachings of the ELCA, it's built on what's already there. How does it function in terms of what it means for each of its audiences? Well, for individuals within the ELCA and outside the ELCA, social message is meant to be an invitation or a challenge to think about a topic in new ways. For leaders within the church, especially roster leaders, it's a framework and a guide for how they talk about particular issues. Roster leaders within the ELCA, when they're speaking on behalf of the ELCA, are expected to share the teachings that are within the ELCA's social statements and social messages and to represent them. When we think of bishops writing letters or the presiding bishop issuing a statement, they use social messages and social statements as a guide to developing those. And for the church itself, they're policy documents. They determine how we can sign on to friend of the court briefs, what legislative issues we might advocate on, letters that we might sign on to with ecumenical or interfaith partners and the like. And they're adopted by the ELCA Church Council, or more often the ELCA Churchwide Assembly. So they have the authority of those bodies. The social message on Earth's climate crisis builds on what's already been articulated in ELCA social teaching in a lot of different ways, especially in its understanding of justice. In the ELCA, our social teachings affirm that justice has kind of 4 expressions: sufficiency, sustainability, solidarity, participation. Justice also takes different forms and types, like intragenerational, the justice we owe to one another currently existing; intergenerational, what we owe to future generations or past generations; and then intersectional, how justice intersects with other issues of justice. So how climate justice might intersect with housing justice, racial justice, or gender justice. All these concepts are great, but how do you put them together in a study guide that helps people make sense of these kind of dense topics? Well, one way to do that is through chunking. Instead of moving through the social message in like a linear page 1, to page 20 kind of path, the study guide chunks topics together. So session 1, for instance, looks at interdependence and sufficiency, and it looks at topics like stewardship versus dominion or the weather versus climate. Each session uses a particular example with videos in order to highlight the real experience or lived experience of those topics. So in the first session, the US Dust Bowl is used. In the second session, we've already seen a part of it, outdoor workers. are the focus. And then the topics that are addressed there are heat, worker safety, and then intergenerational justice and solidarity. As you can see at the top, each session also has a particular connection. Session 1, we're connecting to our story. Session 2, to our neighbors. Session 3, to our food and food systems. Session 4, to the notion of home. So each of these chunks different parts of the social message together. So rather than, as I said, rather than read from page 1 all the way to the end and just study it in that way, the study guide kind of jumps around to pull pieces together that relate to help give a broader understanding of the whole. Each session has a particular set of activities that are bookended by an opening prayer and a closing prayer. I'm going to go through each of these sessions with a little bit more depth, but just to give you an idea of the way each of the 4 sessions flows. Each opens with a prayer. There's a setting the tone activity in which the group covenants with one another to respect each other's voices, to listen, to work together. There's an opening activity that builds that relevance that I talked about, that local relevance and story. There's a Bible study and then a social message study, which form kind of the core of the learning and dive more deeply into scripture and into the social message. Then there's an activity called Make One Change that I'll get to in a moment, followed by a closing prayer. The setting the tone activity is really important because we know that climate change in many areas is a divisive issue. So how do we come together to talk about it in a way that's not just preaching to the choir or just opening us up for divisive debate? The setting the tone activity, each one includes a paragraph from page 13 of the social message, which starts, "We can agree on ends, but disagree on means. Well-intentioned people can disagree about what constitutes the better part of moral action." That's a backbone of ELCA social teaching. We're not all going to agree, but it doesn't mean that we can't come together in prayerful and faithful dialogue about issues. The purpose of the setting the tone activity, short as it is to start building relationships and really establishing openness within the group. The opening activity then introduces the relevance of climate change. So before even getting into the science or the projections of climate change, really want to build relevance. Why should people care about this? We saw an example of one video used in an opening activity already with a video of the UPS driver. In most of the opening activities, people will watch videos in pairs or in small groups, ask some questions. They might consider graphs or facts through guided questions. And the purpose really is to build that relevance. You can see here that there's 4 videos in session 2, but not everyone watches the same video. Each video is about 2 to 3 minutes long. And you have QR codes there. So the idea is that you can split your group into 4 groups, 4 small groups or pairs. And give each one of them a QR code, and they can watch it on a phone, a tablet, or a computer, and then come back together and share about what they heard and what they saw in the video. It also helps the participants feel like they're helping to create the knowledge too, rather than just passively learning themselves. The Bible and the social message studies vary in length, but they introduce a scriptural story or a set of passages to start building that connection with who we are as people of faith. And then the social message study takes us a little bit deeper into the social message and into the concepts that are there, introducing key terms and commitments of the ELCA. There's also ideas for expanding on what's already there, expanding your learning in some call-out boxes. So for example, the green box at the bottom there offers some optional short videos on air pollution from TikTok. They're fantastic, actually. And other activities might introduce terms like what a just transition really means. All of this leads to what I think is really the core of each session, which is an activity called Make One Change. So I mentioned at the outset, all learning has one purpose: to change behavior, to change performance, and to make people feel equipped to make a change. So these Make One Change activities within each session, they're set up like a grid of these small cards. And the idea is that in your group, you'll cut these up and participants can take a card. Each activity is designed to be able to be completed in a small amount of time, less than a week if you're doing sessions on a weekly basis. And so that the idea is the next session they come to, they can bring the card, say they did the activity, and share what it felt like, what they experienced. Some of the activities take a little bit of effort and materials, like the ice cube tray garden starter in session 1. Some are a little bit less intensive with activity. So for instance, it might be Instead of making an ice cube tray garden starter, might mean sharing on social media a picture from one of the activities earlier. Or it might mean thinking about what changes it would take for you to be able to reduce your driving by 10% for 1 week, and how that might impact your life. The idea is that by the end, when you get to session 4, you'll have all of these cards collected, and if possible, if you're using the same room or the same area, to post them each week. By the time you get to session 4, if you have 10 people in your group, you now have 30 cards up of 30 changes, 30 effective actions that you've taken over the course of 3 weeks that were completely doable and effective for learning, for mitigating or adapting to climate change, or for getting the word out and building awareness. In the last session, session 4, the activities are a little bit deeper. These are activities where you move from your small group into congregation, worshiping community, or broader. They might be things like becoming a cool congregation through Interfaith Power and Light, signing a congregational commitment with Lutherans Restoring Creation, or hosting a screening of a documentary film such as Kiss the Ground. Each of the QR codes will take you to the websites for that so that you as a group can look at which activities you want to try to promote within your larger community. So as you can kind of see, each of the components of the sessions connect to one another, and they connect us to a particular other. The setting that tone activity, we're connecting to one another. The opening activity, we're connecting to the real world and relevance in our local community. Bible study, we're connecting to Scripture, our story of who we are as people of faith. The message study, we're connecting to our faith and to our theology. Make one change, we're connecting to our life ahead and the actions that we can take, we can feel empowered to take. So just to sum up, the study guide covers a wide range of topics: worker safety, sustainable farming, climate anxiety, public health, a just transition, but it does so through short readings, videos that on average are about 2 to 3 minutes long. There are a couple that stretch up to maybe closer to 8 to 10 minutes, but that's about it. And graphics that help people engage with the issue. So no one has to come in as an expert already. Each of the sessions and each of the activities connects to participants' life and their faith, drawing on what they already know, what they've already experienced, their own story. And importantly, it cultivates hope and empowerment for action. One of the messages of the social message itself is that there are things we can do, that despair is antithetical to change. And so the study guide really is aimed at those make one change activities and the other activities that people may come up with, rooted in hope, rooted in empowerment, and rooted in the idea that there are communities who are making a difference. And some of the videos throughout the study guide really lift that up, whether it's farmers who are already making changes, young people who are doing some amazing things, or looking at the assets of communities who are placed in the difficult situation of having to decide to migrate because of climate change. But really focusing on assets in each of those communities and in our own. So with that said, what are some ways that you might use this in your context? It's designed for small groups. The age range that I think is most appropriate is probably about junior high to older adult. Some of the activities are, or some of the sessions are accessible to kids maybe in the 5th to 6th grade range. And certainly the activities in the Make One Change sessions, or some of the actions in the Make One Change activities, I should say, involve children. So things that can be done intergenerationally to at least start children thinking about the changes that they can interact with. But it can be done in a variety of settings. It can be done online, as you've seen. We watch the videos online. It can be done with a group as small as 3 or 4, or a group as large as 50 or 60. It all depends on the context that you have. So that's the study guide in kind of a wrap there. Phoebe and Christine and others had a chance to participate in actually using the study guide. So I'm really grateful to hear their feedback. And of course, if you have any questions as well, I'm happy to answer them, or any feedback as well. I'm happy to take that and see if there are things that we might be able to change or improve. This is really important work. As the social message notes, we're in a Kairos moment, which is a moment where we have to make a decision as people, what we're going to do. We've been in that moment for a while. And the church is now with us there. And I think that any of the work that we can do, including the work that many of you already are doing, is so vastly important to us responding to the call that we have as church together. So thank you for being part of it, and thanks for the opportunity to share about this new resource.
Thank you so much. And I kind of flippantly said this isn't a test, but it kind of is as far as us taking action and doing something based on where we are. And I will admit to you that it was Christine and Gabrielle and I that I think were in a meeting, and we were all admitting to each other, oh, isn't it beautiful? Oh, the study guide looks great. Yeah, it looks great. Yeah, it looks great. Has anyone tried it? We hadn't, it had been
Beginning
out
of a
like a
resource
month.
developer's existence. That is a beautiful resource I will not use.
But we realized, well, wait a minute, we can do this online. We can do this with our Creation Care Network. Those of us who are trying to talk about this all the time anyways, within the ELCA, within our network. So we did have kind of an internal time that Christine really ushered. So I'll hand it over to her. But as we go through this a little bit, I would like to ask any of you who are interested in having another session online that we do maybe for 4 months instead of 4 weeks or something like that. As Lutherans Restoring Creation, we would like to host something as well. I do think Christine can get into this and some of the different ways that can be done. I think it is difficult to do online if you can do it with your community, but also we know that some of us feel alone in our church community doing this stuff. So we'll make a place. But yeah, thank you so much, Christine, for offering to do this within the weird community space we are as ELCA and affiliate groups. So thank you.
No problem. I guess I'll introduce myself. My title is Program Director for Environment and Energy Policy. Also kind of long, Ryan. So I think it's fitting, the length of the job title. But I'm with the ELCA Advocacy Office in DC. And it's so nice to see you guys all tonight. I feel like we talk about these calls and your network with LRC Phoebe all the time. So it's great to be here. Yeah, I was like, I feel like we're pushing this towards people to do, but we should definitely try it ourselves. As people, you feel like we're in this work, we're talking about this all the time. It's really good to actually go back to the foundation of where our work is coming from. So thank you, Ryan, for giving us the opportunity to do that in the first place. It was so fun. And so what we did was we set apart 4 1-hour sessions on Teams or Zoom. I think it was Zoom. And kind of had an open invite. So we had people come. I don't know if anyone came to all besides Gabrielle and Phoebe, and I came to all 4, but people would come in and out. And I think the first thing we saw really was there is so much in these sessions that an hour for each session was not enough time. And maybe that's just because we're all little nerds about the topic, but I felt guilty because I don't think I was doing it justice going through each section. And so I think allotting yourself a little bit more time so that you can really have those discussions rather than breezing through each of the sections, I think is really valuable. And so I will say an adjustment we made just to respect people's time and keep it within the hour was kind of acknowledging where the audience was at, knowing that we were people that are working in this space. We didn't lean as much into the education pieces at the beginning about what the climate crisis is and the state of things. Looked a lot more at kind of the theological discussion as well as the study guide discussion, and really allowed a lot more time for group discussion and talking about those discussion questions. But I will say I pour over the study guide, the social message, on a daily, if not weekly basis, because it's my job. Like Ryan had mentioned, churchwide uses these documents as policy, and so but going through the study guide in the context that you put things, Ryan, I saw things for the first time that I feel like I've read these paragraphs many times before. So I think that's really powerful. And then now seeing how it was grouped, I didn't realize that going through it. I don't know if you did, Phoebe, but seeing how
good visual aid. Yeah.
yeah, how you had like grouped the justices and all of that throughout the different sections. That is really a really helpful visual. I might want to take that just to have, because it all makes sense because it flows very well within the sessions, but I guess kind of on the back end of things, it's really nice to have the mastermind behind it all. And then I'll also add, so we held these sessions kind of within our Creation Care Network. I've also, my local church, the minute it got announced and posted, they put it in the bulletin and then came right to me and was like, we want to host this as our Bible study for the summer. And so last week was the first session, and they also host their Bible studies virtually, which I think more and more that's the case for some of these churches. And so I had just kind of adapted the study guide into kind of a PowerPoint form, so it was easier for it to be interactive for people to read. Because if you look at the study guide, it's very much so like ask someone in the group to read this passage aloud and whatnot. So I had kind of just put that all onto PowerPoint so that it could be easily used in a virtual setting like this. And so I think Phoebe,
I will be sharing that immediately. You know how we have this recording of this session, we'll have a post that will have more resources. Your PowerPoint will be on there, but eventually I'm sure we can get it on the ELCA site. I just have less control over that. So that'll take a little while longer, but I think that would be a huge resource to be able to just have a PowerPoint to hit play on. And to some people's questions too, I think we could do some shorter versions or like less colorful versions, a couple things. So I'm happy to work with Ryan too, to make different iterations if it's easier for you to use in your setting that way. So look for a resource, and I'm soaking up some of the good suggestions here as well. So thank you for that. I didn't mean to cut you off, Christine. What else did you want to?
That was exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, and so I didn't get to send even Ryan my PowerPoint, but it's nothing at the quality of the one that you just shared. You're so good at the little.
Well,
graphics.
Maybe we can integrate both of them as well too. That would be good.
Sure, it's wonderful. Love to see it.
Yeah, I can share it. It's a lot of copying and pasting from your study
but
guide.
It's helpful, right? And it's already done. That's what we like to share here. So let's not duplicate efforts. A couple things I just wanted to highlight, and I want to offer, if Gabrielle and or Keith want to, they were at all of these sessions as well. Now that I see that you were jumping around as you were talking about how people take in this information, I think it's really important to remember our human condition, and that there's only so much we can take of certain things, of lots of, of the urgency. I see Jeffrey's question here about the urgency isn't there. And for those of us that do feel the urgency, I do feel like running up to people on the street and and shaking them by the shoulders, but that's not necessarily where everyone's at. And even though we want them to be, and that's not necessarily how to communicate this well. So first off, too, to really understand your audience, as Christine mentioned, we knew that we were getting together with people that were like in it and wanted to be in this. If you're just asking your church to hang out after on coffee hour, there might be people there that have never really heard of what climate change means. And you might have to start way back at the beginning. Just keep in mind that while you might feel like you're at X, Y, and Z and ready to go, please just be gentle with the people that are A, B, and C. Just understand that they're not there yet. And that doesn't mean that they're not caring people. They just don't have the, experiences that you have had. So I think it's really important to understand your audience. And speaking of which too, I love the fact that there are so many videos, because I work with a lot of youth groups, and we didn't have a problem having enough to say, but when you're with a bunch of youth in a room and they're all looking at their feet or their phones, it's just so nice to have some kind of visual aid. And something to go off of. It's a really great starting point. So I thank you, Ryan, for the research that it took to do that. So I'll also say that a week goes by really fast, and the try this cards, the action cards, we're going to share a lot of those ideas at Youth Gathering. Thank you. Those are great ideas. And I recognize that every time I said I'd do something, all of a sudden it was the next week. And I was like, I didn't do that thing I said I'd do. So it is good to have accountability partners, but also maybe I'm curious how this would work to do, you know, a month in between times, or to have accountability partners to say, hey, we're getting together again. Did you remember to do your thing? Yeah, those are my few suggestions, but Gabrielle, Keith, do you, either of you want to share?
And Quentin came.
Yes, Quentin was not with us too. Yay.
Yes, I was.
Well,
Was
I
that
think
it,
it was
Quentin? That's
it
what
was
you
a
were
good
gonna say?
experience. It was a good experience for me. It was a little overwhelming. We always seem to be short on time, so I think we had to be able to allocate an appropriate amount of time to spend on the subject. And we didn't necessarily get to the point of taking many specific actions, and I think that's helpful because there's some accountability and follow through there. No matter where we're at, there's something we could do in a week or a month or whatever that period of time is.
Yeah, I thought for me, it was great to see, Ryan, your graphic with all the connections. Because I feel there are many people that I talk to who their faith comes very first, and that's how they relate to climate change. And there are people who I talk to who encountered climate change in a secular setting first, and then faith came into that later. And so I really appreciated the connections, faith, climate, people, non-people creatures, and all of that was a part of this and engaging.
Thanks. This is great to hear. Like yeah, especially the notion about the time. I whenever I'm writing like learning materials, I tend to plan maximally, because I'd rather be the teacher who has too much and he can't get to everything than the one who's stuck like trying to figure out what to do for the remaining 15 minutes. So yeah, I try to plan you maximally for it. But the hope is that it can fit into a session. Some of it's going to depend on the size and nature of your group. If it's a group used to these conversations, can have a lot more to say. If it's a group that's not, they might be more hesitant. You move through things a little bit more quickly. The two things I gotta keep in mind with the group or with the sessions is they really are built for people to enter no matter what their stage of learning is. So like I said, the first session gets it the question of how do you respond when someone says, well, yeah, the climate's changing, but it's freezing outside right now. So much for global warming. How do you answer that? How do you get at there's just that basic difference between weather and climate? All the way to some deeper things about, like I mentioned, heat safety standards. I think the importance of stories is really central too, no matter what we're doing. I go back to a conversation I had with and I've shared this with others before. A conversation I had with an older gentleman who's a close friend, who is just really resistant to any idea of climate change. Did not care, the fake science, all this kind of stuff. You'd have these conversations with him, and there was really no changing his opinion until one day he was talking about fishing walleye in Lake Erie. I'm in Michigan, so the Great Lakes area, fishing walleye in Lake Erie, and then trying to explain to him that walleye population is moving north. That as much as he wants to share with his grandchildren the experience of fishing walleye in Lake Erie, like he did and his dad did and his grandfather did, that experience may not be there for his grandchildren. And then it hit. Wait a minute, story of a flood in Malawi, a typhoon in the Pacific, this is not hitting for him. But walleye moving out of Lake Erie, that hits, so sometimes it's that story, that helps to build that connection. And that really is kind of, the backbone of this. I also just wanted to, and I didn't do this earlier, and I should have, just give a shout out to the people who worked on that social message. Some of whom Jim Martin Schramm and others who worked on that social message, we're really, it takes a huge team and a lot of listening to be able to put those together and to have such great source material to work from, and for the church to come out and say some of the things that we said. That we're not going to, we're going to reject science that is falsifying data, that we're no longer going to recognize the validity of that we're going to start making efforts to change, that we're going to be looking at just transition and things like that, I think is incredibly important and a huge step forward for our church.
It makes my job way easier.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
We can advocate on a lot more with this message. So, yeah.
And this is the first resource, the first social teaching resource in the ELCA to mention climate anxiety, and to call people who are in pastoral roles to attend to climate anxiety and eco anxiety among people in their communities. And that's tremendous, to acknowledge that really is a very real experience, and one that we do need to be responding to pastorally.
Wanted to give a shout out to the people out there. Were over 500 people that commented on the first iteration of the message, and good and bad. And that's what we're able to do together. But like, people responded, people wrote something, and there's like a conversation going on. This is what this conversation is about. Like, the idea too, that the stories are so important. The stories are mostly important when they are heard by people, right? So just keep that in mind, that it's great to have this study guide, but you're able to lean on this only because you're bringing it to people at your church. Most people are not going to go seeking this. The people that need to hear this are not going to go seeking this. So I just want to encourage all of you to use this, but know that people need you because they know you're in their life.
I did just want to acknowledge the question from Sharon, who wrote in the chat. I hear repeatedly that, quote, "This world has had this before and it never destroyed us. We're still here." I've heard that too. Yeah, I think one of the things to remember, and I think the social message really does lift this up, is that it's not about avoiding destruction. It's about responding to a call. The notion of that we need to be terrified of the future, and so we have to act out of terror or fear or desperation, or not act because there's nothing we can do, is opposed to what's in that social teaching, which really is about the idea that we have a calling, and we have we've been gifted with the gifts to be able to respond to that calling, and so it's about hope. It's about agency. It's also not about us, because it may never have destroyed us, but as the Dust Bowl said, we did destroy the land pretty good. So there's that, but it's not about avoiding. It's not just about avoiding the worst, but it is about responding in hope to a critical moment.
So I guess I don't disagree with anything you said, but I have two additional reactions.
Sure.
First of all, this statement is completely false and it's frankly absurd. But if someone actually believes this, they don't want to hear the facts anyways. There's no point in telling them. It's a completely ludicrous statement. But I think one of the other things that's very important is when we look at what can be done to address climate change, it's all good for us, for society, for the planet. I mean, it's just, why would you not want to do it just because it's good? As people of faith, we should be about trying to do good. Well, gee, this is all doing good. So, I don't really care if people believe in climate change or not. You don't have to believe in climate change to understand that, pollution kills people. So maybe we should reduce pollution. And what are some ways we can do that? Well, let's shut down those coal-fired power plants. And that has nothing to do with climate change. That's about particulates more so than anything else in air pollution. So I don't know. So people who believe things that are obviously and patently false, there's no point in telling them they're wrong, because they don't want to hear it, because they have already decided to believe a falsehood. So they are already rejecting truth. But I think there can be common ground looking at all the things that we can do as a society to respond to climate change, if we do the right things, are going to make us better, our communities better, the world better. So why, as people of faith, would we not do them?
That's a great reminder. And one of the things I would say too, with the study guide is not intended to convince anyone that climate change is real. It's not written from a standpoint of convincing people. It assumes that and then connects to the stories.
To mention to Lisa's comment about trying not to necessarily change the minds of people who are not open to that. I think a lot of times if we welcome more people to the table, we're certainly going to get lots of different opinions, and trying to find that common ground and understand that we're there. Most people show up to church to try to do better in loving their neighbor, and understanding and coming at that from the common ground perspective is usually will aid traction rather than throwing out a lot of facts and figures. So what I've found helpful working with the ELCA staff people in hunger, in disaster relief, and all these different ways that obviously our ministries focus on loving thy neighbor, and see the intersection of where caring for creation inherently belongs with them, not, arm wrestling for budget funds. I think if you can think of that going through, if you're welcoming people and there are 20 people on the, World Hunger Team, but you don't have anybody on your green team, go hang out with the hunger team. We're all on the same team here.
Also want to name the final session, Ryan, leaving it off on a message of hope and agency, like what we had mentioned. I think what I've found in these spaces time and time again is a feeling of hopelessness. It's like the people that are really active, and then the people, a lot of the times it's not that they're rejecting science, it's that they don't want to believe it because it's so depressing and it feels really hopeless. And so I think I found being a faith voice in this space, in the environmental space especially, is that's something we can bring, and it's not a actionless hope or a blind hope, which is really touched upon in the last session. And so I just want to name that, put that out there, because I think that's really powerful and something that I hope we can continue to do, along with addressing climate anxiety, because those are both huge.
So Christine, I agree with you. Hope from our faith is very important. But I think one of the other important points is the Bible doesn't say, assess if the situation is hopeless or if it looks good before you decide to go out and follow what I'm telling you to do. It says go out and do this. Okay, so the call is there regardless of how we assess the situation. Micah 6:8 says go out, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. It doesn't say assess the situation and decide if you're going to do these things. It says you are called to do this, period, regardless of the situation. So I think there are other aspects of the faith that can be brought to bear here. We are not being asked to assess, we're being asked to respond to the call.
I think we're talking about the same thing.
I hope so.
Yeah, when I say hope, I mean like hope that there can be action taken. I'm not saying hope like the situation's fine. Nowhere in it does it say that. The hope is that we can still make change and we can stop the worst effects from happening. So what you were referencing is exactly what I was talking about.
Good, because when some people hear hope and the faith, oh, God's going to swoop in and save us, we don't need to do anything. Our hope is in the Lord.
Yeah.
So you have to be really careful about how you use that word, because depending on which reference you look at, it can lead to complete and total inaction.
I've heard it called an alibi before too. Barbara, go ahead. I see your hand and we just have a couple more minutes. So go ahead, Barbara.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the study guide is magnificent, and the social statement. When I think about back to the whole process that got us here at the Milwaukee Churchwide Assembly, but even before that, we had a really fight to get this. We went to the Conference of Bishops. It was young people who asked for this social message. And it was really inspiring how they, because the answer was always, well, we already have the care for creation statement. And the young people I met with said, hey, we weren't even born when that was written. We need something new. So but then on the review group for the social message, it was really tough because we had the bishop from Western North Dakota, which is an oil producing area. We had coal people on there. It was a very wide and representative sampling of ELCA people. So I just think it's miraculous that we got the statement to be able to say this is a Kairos moment, which to me as a Bible scholar is a really rich and important word. It means an opportune moment, a very positive, but also urgent. And a lot of the stuff that's in there about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is pretty hard hitting. So, the ELCA has possibly right now a majority of Republican voters. I don't even know. I mean, we don't know for sure, but I think it's a miraculous document and visionary that Jim Martin Tram wrote. And then Ryan with his study guide, it's fabulous. So thank you. And I will say, if people want to go further, then join Lutherans Restoring Creation, because the sort of parachurch organizations can do more radical stuff than the church-wide can. So we need both, obviously, and Phoebe works for both. But
being radical and making sure that this conversation started. So I'm so glad you got to be here, Barbara, because you really took their voice and you were knocking on the doors behind the scenes. So
but it's not as far as some of us would want. But Jim Martin Tram said he wasn't willing to be the author unless we could say this is a Kairos moment. And because that grounds it then in the apartheid struggle in South Africa. This is almost like a status confessionis word. So this is pretty far reaching, even if it doesn't go as far as the world needs right now to address climate change. But hopefully it's a document with tons of activities, make one change. And that I put in the chat that on page 17 in the document that help people understand they have the power to make lasting change. That was put in after it went out for review. As Phoebe said, 500 responses. The people in the Minneapolis area said were insistent that that be in there, that community organizing is absolutely key, and that the visionary thing that community organizing can make change. That got in the message thanks to responses from people. So always respond to like the new social document. Also, it's not a message this time, the one on civic life, it's an actual social statement. Anyway, thanks to everybody, Ryan, Phoebe, everybody, Christine, Gabrielle.
Barbara for starting the conversation, literally. Tor, go ahead real quick if you can.
Yeah, great program. I'm really impressed with the thoughtfulness and the composure and the structure. I think you've got a really good program here. I'm just going to put in the pitch that there's a small group within this group that really have a deep scientific background like me. Maybe we should kind of hang together in our own little group, and because we're going to take this to a much higher level. Because I understand when you're working with people in church, most of them don't have a scientific background. This is really new to them, and that's 95% of them. But for that, we need a little bit of us. It's like siphoning off the energy so that we don't kind of get in there and say, what, you didn't put in, Higginton's formula.
And I do appreciate too how most of us in our church community do have people like you, Tor, who are scientifically minded, and to lean on them and ask for their advice and ask them to come to the conversation, I think is really important. So thank you, Tor, for being here, but also for inviting people to that very particular part of the conversation.
Yeah. And I would also add too, I mean, obviously we recognize that kind of knowledge as a gift from God, and is critically important for our church. And I would say that from our side, when we're developing social teachings in the ELCA, we engage and rely on people with deep knowledge in a lot of different areas, whether it's climate science, economics, genetic science, things like this. So there's always space to have those conversations and to learn from you all. And just want to say thanks for the many ways that you do share that knowledge within the church and outside the church and in your other fields. But yeah, we definitely engage and need that deep knowledge too, so that we can be informing what the church is doing. We want anything the church is doing to not only be faithful, but also to be faithful to the gift of wisdom that God has given us.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ryan, so much for joining us tonight, and thank all of you for being here with your amazing questions. And I really appreciate, I'm sorry if I didn't get to all of them, but I'm certainly going to go through this chat and make sure we bring those in. I like the idea of having maybe a quarterly session to do the study guide together in a very particular way, but I really encourage you all to try this at home. Tell us when you're trying it at home. We'd like to know and be in conversation with you and hook you up with other groups that are doing it as well. So let us know. I know it's 1 past the hour, but I would like to share a Howard Thurman quote that I heard today that I think those of you that are trying to go to sleep after this might have a hard time. And I think this might settle your mind a little bit. So I know Howard Thurman doesn't seem to settle. Well, it's unsettling, that's the point. But before I close with this, I just want you to know that you don't have to have taken a lot of notes. We will do a post and recording, thanks to Gabrielle being with us. Thank you, Gabrielle, for being with us. And I encourage you all to come to our next session as well. July 30th, correct, is our next connections call, where we're going to be talking about another really intense conversation about what your investments, money, how your green wallet could affect your green economy, your green world, our economy. Do you have anything else to add, Gabrielle? I feel like I'm forgetting stuff, but that's why I need to read this quote right now. Okay.
I see Donna asked, yes, the recording will go via email, on our YouTube, on Facebook, pretty much every media. So you'll see it somewhere.
Smoke signals. No. Okay.
And sorry, the PowerPoint is in the chat now. You can download it there.
Oh, that was quick. Thank you, Ryan. I'll also put that on the post, so it'll be somewhere all the time. Thanks. Wonderful. It is very good to turn aside from the rush and weariness and the anxieties by which these days beset and lay siege to our moments, to rest in the presence of God. It is good to pause and make an end of so much that bothers and harasses the spirit, to assess the meaning of our lives in the light of the movement of the Spirit within us. I'm going to read it one more time. It is very good to turn aside from the rush and weariness and the anxieties by which these days beset and lay siege to our moments, to rest in the presence of God. It is good to pause and make an end of so much that bothers and harasses the spirit, to assess the meaning of our lives in the light of the movement of the Spirit within us. That's Howard Thurman from the Centering Moment. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.